Hello friends and welcome to the channel. In this video we will be going over the Dragonsong's Reprise Ultimate Phase 2 and how my group personally deal with all the mechanics and a breakdown of all the mechanics as well. So without further delay, let's just get right into it. Throughout this phase we will be facing off against Forden, and some reoccurring mechanics from previous fights with Forden will come into play here, but they'll be done in such a wildly different way. So as a main tank, we want to try and keep him in the middle. Not entirely important, but just try and keep him in the middle. Of course, face him away because his auto attacks here are going to cleave. And the first mechanic that he's going to be casting is this mechanic right here. It's called Ascalon's Mercy Concealed. Now, this is going to be baited cleave AoEs, which you can dodge. So the idea here is to have the entire party behind the boss, and as soon as that cast is finished, everyone's going to move and then they're going to dodge the mechanic. As a main tank here, I'm actually going to move to the side here, and then once the cast is finished, I'm just going to move back to my original spot there. So you're going to see that right now. And just like that, no one got hit by the cleaves. We all successfully baited the cleaves and then dodged. After that, he's going to do these 3 cleave tank busters. You'll see Ascalon's Might here, and it's a massive cleave, as you can see. So obviously you don't have your group in front. You don't want to be aiming this at your group, and it's going to depend on your tank composition. Now, for this very first set of cleaves, we have me, the warrior, home gang through them, and that's just how we deal with it. Some groups do have the tank use cooldowns through it, so it's really going to depend on your composition. You can copy what my group does, or you can kind of craft your own way to deal with this. You're going to see why we home gang it anyway in just a moment, but for now, this is going to depend on your comp wildly, your tank comp, so just keep that in mind. The next thing he'll do is he'll dash to the middle. Once he's done his cleaves, he'll stop doing auto attacks on the tank. So as soon as you take that third tank cleave as the tank, he won't do any more attacks, so don't worry too much about that. He's then going to cast this ability here called Strength of the Ward, as you can see. And this is going to be his trio. People like to call this Trio 1. And this is going to be purely mechanically focused. There's going to be no enemy to target at this point, so don't worry about that. It's going to be pure mechanics. So just be ready for this. And as soon as this cast is finished, what we're going to do is we're actually going to pan our camera around, and we want to look for the Dragoons. So you're going to see that now. We're going to pan our camera around. We saw that there was a Dragoon here on B. We then pan our camera around. We see there's a Dragoon here on 4. And then we see there's a Dragoon here on 1. Now, this means for our group personally and how we do the waymarks, this means red is not safe. Yellow or green, whatever you want to call it, is also not safe. And purple is also not safe. So the last option here is the blue waymark. So we're going to go to blue here. Now, this is how our group does it, because you see here, we actually need to swap into 2 light parties here. So preferably do this before you actually pull, is sort out 2 light parties. Preferably have a tank healer and then 2 DPS on one side, and then obviously another tank healer and 2 DPS on the other side. Now, these Dragoons do a massive dash throughout the middle of the map, correlating to a intercardinal or cardinal direction. So it's going to take up that whole space of the arena, and this is why we do the waymarks like we do. Let me quickly go over that. So we have blue and blue opposite each other, red and red opposite each other, purple and purple opposite each other, and green or yellow opposite and opposite of each other. This means that if a Dragoon was to dash through B to 2, this means that green would not be a safe spot. So we've already know that green isn't a safe spot. Same with red and same with purple. And then we saw that blue waymarks were free, so we know that it is blue and that's the safe spot. Now, next up, I'm going to explain it as it comes. Is you'll see that we're in this sort of triangle formation here. We've got 1 person here, 1 person here, 1 person here, and 1 person here. Now, you're going to see why we do that in just a moment. These lightning AoEs go out, as you can see, and they're quite a big circle around us, as you can see, and then obviously the dives were happening as well, so there wasn't too much room to work around here. So you need to split your light parties into 4 spreads, depending on where the safe spot is in this sort of formation. You know, 1 in front, 1 to the left, 1 to the right, and then 1 behind, right? So that's pretty simple. It doesn't matter who you have at the front. We actually have tanks at the front, healers in the middle here, and then 2 DPS off to the side. It doesn't matter how you want to spread these people out. Just make sure that you are discussing this as a group and you know your spread locations. Now, I'm going to have to play it back a little bit, but you'll notice before the lightnings, there's actually another AoE. You'll see the warrior warrior here is casting this AoE right here, right? And this is a earthquake. It's going to start like this. You're going to see the first set of earthquakes, but after that, it's going to keep expanding and expanding. But every time the earthquake goes off, so all of this area is going to be a safe spot, and then this earthquake is going to go off, right? And then all of this area is going to be a safe spot, and then this earthquake goes off, and then all of this area will be a safe spot. You're going to see exactly what I mean in the footage, but basically what you want to do is you want to move into the AoE as it's happening, because if you do get hit by this, it's going to stun you and you're most likely going to die. So you need to pay attention to that. What I do as a front person is I just move back to my group, pay attention here because that's where you just despawned and the earthquakes are going to go off, and I didn't even know where it was going off, and I just pan my camera here, and then of course I see these earthquakes and I'm like, okay, that's where the earthquakes are. I'm safe to stay in here for a little bit, and then the third one will go off and I want to run into that one. Preferably always the third or second one. You can also run into the first one if it's close to you, but you don't want to do it later than the third one. If you leave it to the fourth one, there is actually a fourth one here. Like that, you're actually going to die to this attack right here. Now, let me rewind it again. You'll notice that Forden is in the very middle here, and he's casting Ascalon's Mercy Concealed. That's the very first mechanic he does when he is targetable. So we want to deal with this pretty much the same way how we dealt with the very first one. We all want to dodge this, but in a line. So we're all in a nice line, as you can see. We're all going to bait this cleave in a line. And so is that other group there. You can't see them because they're behind Forden, but they're in a straight line here. We're also in a straight line here. And as soon as that cast is finished, like it has, we then all move to the right or left here. And then we safely avoided the baited cleaves. Now that we've done that, we're actually on the second part of the trio. And what we want to do in the second part of the trio is there's a few things that we have to do. So the first thing we have to do is look at these two knights and see where they are facing. Their shields, if you pay attention to their shields are basically going to point towards Forden is going to spawn. So in this instance, Forden is 100% going to spawn over here on the 4-way mark. So that's our first note that we have to take. You'll also notice these players with these blue marks above their heads. This means that dragoons are going to dive them and do a massive AoE around them. It is not a proximity based version like in the normal and extreme mode. Instead, it's just a massive AoE around them and no one else can get hit by this AoE. So there's going to be 3 of these. They're going to be on random players other than the tanks, and there is no priority there. It's just complete random players other than the tanks, because the tanks actually have their own mechanics to deal with here. So I'm going to let that play out before it's too much information to take in. So we already know that Forden is over here, right? And we see these 3 blue markers here, and we also see all these AoEs here. There's exactly 4 safe spots here. Okay, so there's one over here, there's one over here, a bit over to the side of the arena. You can't really see it in the footage, and there's also going to be one down here. Now these blue waymarks are going to have to adjust and go in these 3 quadrants here, while the rest of the party is actually going to run to Forden, and I'm going to explain why in a moment, but for now I just need you to focus on these blue marks. So these blue marks are in pretty good spots already. You can see that the scholar here is most likely going to go over here. Now the bard is either going to go over here or over here. That really depends, because it might be easier for the black mage to go here while the bard can go here, because it's less distance overall. So you kind of have to just think about how everyone is spread out and how easy it is for everyone else. So in the most likely case, the bard is either going to go down here or over here, but probably down here. We'll let the footage play out. We'll see what the bard does, and either way isn't exactly wrong, but it would be a lot easier if the bard did go down here. It's going to make it easier for the black mage. So as you can see, the bard does go down there. The scholar does go over here. It's a little bit of a mess, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, they did manage to coordinate this. Regardless, you'll see that there's also all these towers around the map. These towers are pretty simple, actually. These blue markers are obviously going to take this tower, right? That blue marker is going to take that tower, and this blue marker is going to take that tower. There are 6 towers in total, so 3 blue markers are going to take the towers in front of them. Really simple. I'm going to let a little bit more of the footage play out real quick now, because what we as tanks do here is we position by these paladins here. So I'm by this paladin, and you see my Dark Knight is by this paladin. These paladins are going to use those tank buster tethers that you saw in the very first phase. Instead, there's going to be 2 of them, so both tanks need to take these preferably, and they're either going to invuln this or pop all of their cooldowns for this. And they're going to run to Forden. Now, do be wary, this tether can be a little bit of a pain, so really do make sure to take this, and make sure to pop sprint as well. You're going to need sprint or XP expedient from your scholar if you have a scholar. As you can see, we have expedient, so it wasn't really an issue for us. So we take these tethers and we actually cross them like this. So he goes from that and I go from this. And this is going to make it so we don't cleave each other with the tethers. Now, you don't need to do this because sometimes they don't cleave each other anyway. Even if I was to go like this, for example, you don't need to cross them, but I think it's just a lot more safer to cross these tethers. Now, you'll notice that the whole group is here. The 3 remaining players that don't have anything to do are in Forden, and there's 3 towers here, right? So these players just need to coordinate which towers they're going to take. In most cases, we have the healer go middle, but sometimes there isn't a healer in the stack. So they're all just going to have to coordinate. They're going to have to use voice comms, and they're going to have to say which tower they're going to take. Meanwhile, the tanks are going to go into these corners here, and there's actually a stack here, which 5 players are going to take. The 2 tanks and the 3 free players here. And as you can see, we took the Dragon's Rage, which was the stack, Holy Shield Bash, which is the thing that stuns the tanks, and then, of course, the tanks get cleaved here by the Paladins. These are cleaves, so do make sure that the group moves out the moment those cleaves are going off to get their towers. Forden will then become targetable again and start casting Ancient Quagga. Do make sure to have some mitigations up for this. There's pretty much no excuse not to have an Addle, a Feint, and a Reprisal up for this. As for the other mitigations, that will be down to you. Now, what happens here is a Heavenly Heal, as you can see, and this is a tank buster on the tank. It's going to give them a slashing down resistance, and that means the follow-up attacks are going to most likely kill the tank, and the follow-up attacks are actually those massive cleaves that Forden does at the very beginning. Now, how you do this, again, is completely up to you. You can have one tank the Heavenly Heal with some cooldowns up, and then have a tank swap. Or you can have one tank just use their invulnerability like my group does, and they just take the entirety of this tank buster sequence. After the tank cleaves, he'll dash to the middle again, you'll see, and he's going to cast a new ability called Sanctity of the Ward, as you can see here. And this is his quote-unquote Trio 2, which most people will refer to it as. Now, we're going to let the cast play out, and I'm going to break down everything that you're going to see on the map first before we even break down any of the mechanics. Okay, so there's a few things we need to pay attention to. The Paladins, the Dark Knight here, and we also want to pay attention to where Forden jumped. Now, in this footage, you can't see exactly where he jumped to, but that's okay. What we need to pay attention to is these eyes as well. You're going to see these eyes. You'll see this eye over here. Very hard to get a good shot at it, but this eye is going to gaze you if you're looking at it. So that's pretty bad. You can't get gazed by this eye because it's going to kill you if you do. There's also Forden. I think he's over here-ish, and he's also doing a gaze or an eye mechanic. So again, you need to not be looking at Forden or this eye during this mechanic. So pay attention to those eyes. Now let's quickly break down what these Paladins are doing. First, I think that's important. So the first Paladin here, and depending on what group you are, is depending on what direction you're going to go. So you want to pay attention, really, my biggest tip is to the shield. And where is the shield pointing? This shield is pointing like over here, and this Paladin shield is pointing like over here. Now this Paladin, we as group 2 here, don't really want to pay attention to him too much, because where he's dashing is also kind of in relation to how we're going to dodge as well. So pay attention to the Paladin closer to you. So the Paladin closer to us is this Paladin here. We want to pay attention because this means he's going to dash over to this direction, which means the movement is going to be counterclockwise. And you're going to see that in the footage exactly. The Paladin's over there, and we're going to move to the left because that's counterclockwise, right? So we're going to move to the left here, and that's how we're going to dodge. We're going to see these orbs and the Paladin's dashing, and we just want to simply dodge these orbs. It can be a little bit difficult to dodge them, but once you get a feel for this kind of movement, this kind of dodge, you'll kind of understand how to do this dodge. So you'll see that that big AoE literally there went off, and that one there. And as soon as that's gone off, what we're going to do here is we're just going to move through it to avoid that orb, and then obviously we've done it. We've done that movement. Now there's a big mechanic here that I haven't gone over because I just wanted to break down all of that first, the movement and not looking at the eyes and the how we dictate if we're going counterclockwise or clockwise. Remember, just pay attention to your Paladin on your side. So this would be their Paladin, the group 1's Paladin, and this is group 2's Paladin. Both groups are going to move the exact same direction anyway, so in this instance they're going to move counterclockwise and we're also going to move counterclockwise. So absolutely fine. but because they're both basically doing the same thing, just pay attention to your own knight, and that's all you need to pay attention to. Don't pay attention to this one, if that is just the group you're going to. Now, I need to break down the swords and what the Dark Knight is actually doing. So you know that group 1 is going to go opposite of the Dark Knight. Group 2 is going to go to the Dark Knight. Now, these groups are the groups that we decided in Trio 1. So to give you an example, group 2 is my group, and that is myself as the warrior, my scholar, my ninja, and my black mage. So defaultly, we're going to go to the Dark Knight here, which is group 2. And defaultly for the other group, they're going to go opposite the Dark Knight because they are group 1. Now, these swords above people's heads are very important. You probably saw in the movement we were getting a massive hit on us during that movement part, and yes, I'm going to explain that now. These swords are what dictates those big cleaves on those groups. So one sword is the first stack cleave that the Dark Knight is going to do. Two swords is the second stack cleave that the Dark Knight is going to do. He's going to do this twice to each group. So what we need to do here is sword number 1, no exceptions, needs to go to group 1. Sword number 2, these two swords here, needs to go to group 2. No exceptions again. So in this instance, luckily for us, our ninja, who is group 2, had to swap to group 1. But Group 1's Dark Knight had 2 swords, who is originally in Group 1, so he had to swap to Group 2. So this swap pretty much fixed itself, right? We didn't have to think about anything here. Now, there is instances, and I'm going to break this down now, where 2 of the same group both get swords. In this instance, we need a flex player. This flex player is basically going to listen out for a cooldown. So, for instance, if I had a sword, if I had one sword, I would simply say to my group in Discord, I am swapping to group 1. Because I've said that call and because I've made that call, they know that I have to swap to group 1 and group 2 are going to be missing a player, which means the flex player from group 1 is then going to swap to group 2. This flex player can be any player in the group. It doesn't matter who, preferably 2 of the same role. So for our instance, we had our ranged DPS be flex players. We had our black mage be the flex player for group 2, and we had our bard or dancer be the flex player for group 1. They are basically just listening out for that call. The moment someone does that call, they know that they need to swap. Now, if you have 2 swords, so if I got 2 swords and I am in group 2 anyway, I don't say anything because I'm not doing a swap at that point. So I don't want to confuse my flex players by saying, oh, I have 2 swords. Oh, but wait, I don't need to swap. I don't want to do that because naturally I'm going to go to group 2 anyway. So there's no adjustment needing to be made there. So if you are doing this flex player thing, just make sure that if you do get a sword above your head and it is not your group's sword, then you need to call out that you need to adjust. Just say adjusting to group 1. Then your flex player is going to know that they need to adjust. Now I'm going to let this footage play out, but you'll notice that I also said 3 players can take this. Now the reason for this is if you have the right mitts. We have a lot of mitts, as you can see. You're going to see the amount of mitts that we have. We have Shake It Off, okay? We have Panheimer. We have Kerachol. We have a lot of mitts here. We even have a sucker. So plenty of mitts here. And for this reason, we can actually take a 3-player stack. So if your flex player is not paying attention or whatever, and you have the mitts for this, it's not going to be the end of the world. You can take a 3-player stack. So do keep that in mind, but only keep that in mind if you have the correct mitts. You need enough mitts. In our case, we have a sage and a scholar, but you can get away with this as long as you have 1 barrier healer and maybe you have a warrior or a paladin throwing out their mitigations, their shields. So just keep that in mind. It is going to be completely relevant to your composition and how many mitts you have for this. You might not have enough mitts for it. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now let's move on to the second part of the second trio, which is where things get slightly more complicated, but let me explain. It will make sense. So the first thing we'll do is we'll all come to the middle here, and we all have a designated cardinal position. Now there's only 4 cardinals naturally. First things first, okay? We have a tank, a DPS, another tank and another DPS, a healer and a DPS, and another healer on DPS on each cardinal direction. Doesn't matter who goes where, as long as you have these designated positions. For instance, I know that I am north and my black mage is also directly north as well. So I know my designated position. So you'll see that in the footage. I go directly north, which is where Forden spawns, conveniently enough. One more thing to note as well is the reason we have a DPS and a tank together is because one of the roles are going to get these ice puddles and we need to stack them. And we also need to make sure we're not placing them too far out. We need to kind of place these in the middle here, because if we do place them too far out, it's going to kill the people at the outside of the arena. But if we also place them too far in, it's going to kill the people in the inside of the arena. So make sure we're trying to center these ice puddles. They are baited on the players that don't get prey markers, so just be aware of that. And you'll see these AoEs here, these flame AoEs. Just a quick breakdown of what these are. They're simply going to explode and be fire AoEs, so you need to not be inside of these and you'll need to not go into them after the fact. Now, you'll also notice that this mark above my Black Mage's head, and you'll also notice they are also in the party list here as well. So 2 ways to look at it: look at the party player's head, and also look at this prey mark here, which means that those players have the meteors. Now, these meteors are very important, and personally what my group does is we always have these meteors north and south, no exceptions. So in this instance, unfortunately you cannot see it, but my Black Mage has the prey mark. You can see that part, but my Dancer also has a prey mark. Now he is usually over here, but he needs to go over here, right? So you're not actually going to see the adjust, and for this reason alone, we're going to have multiple playbacks of this footage just to really make sure that you understand what's going on here. But all that's happened here is because we always have the prey markers or meteor markers north and south, and he was actually on the east or west. I can't fully recall where that he was, but he was on the east or west, so he needs to swap with a DPS player south. He needs to kick that DPS player off of the south location, and then that DPS player will go in his old spot instead. The tanks and healers, on the other hand, don't need to do anything at this particular moment because their role doesn't have the meteor mark. They don't need to worry about the adjust. Only the meteor players need to worry about the adjust here. So what we usually do is we usually do it clockwise. For instance, if our ninja had a prey marker, but our Black Mage still had a prey marker, he would look clockwise, but then he would be like, okay, I see that the prey marker is already north, so I need to go here instead, right? So instead of going north, he's going to go south and kick that person off. And then that person who got kicked off just going to take his spot instead. Quite simple, really. A really simple movement. There's plenty of time to do this movement as well, so there's no stress. Of course, we do have that priority system in place because there is an instance where, say, if our ninja did have the prey marker and our dancer also had the prey marker, they could go clockwise like this instead, right? And that would be an easy swap. They would go like this, and then the dance would go like this. It's a very easy swap. So we do have a priority in place, but when it comes to someone already being north or south, it's obvious which spot you need to take then. That person who is already north or south is going to hold their position. Now, you'll also notice that there is towers around the map. There is, in this case, there is 2 towers in the middle, and there is 6 towers outside of the arena. Now, when DPS roles get the prey markers, or tanks and healers, whoever gets the prey markers are always going to take the outer towers, no exceptions. So their role, after the fact that they've got the meteors, is pretty easy. They know that all they need to do is they need to take the towers outside. So in this case, it's DPS with prey markers. So all DPS are going to go out, no exceptions. Now, you'll notice that I actually looked here, and where we are looking is basically like this. Like this. This is my whole designated location, right? That is it. That's pretty big. That's quite a big space to cover. Past this 4-way mark, I'm not paying attention to that. And past the B-way mark, I'm not paying attention to that either. But this whole quadrant here, this whole big thing that I've highlighted, that is my quadrant. So if there were a tower here, and of course there's a tower there, I know that even though the DPS have prey markers, I am the only possible person to take these towers. Again, if there was instead a tower over here, then I know that I need to take either this tower or this tower, and that's going to depend on the DPS that calls out as well, because another priority that we have is DPS always are going to take the clockwise tower. Tanks and heals are always going to take the most counter-clockwise tower. Now, this isn't always the case, because sometimes this tower here and the south tower, say if the south tower was opposite of this, say if the south tower here was over here. So that tower is over here on the minimap, as you can see, and then there was another tower there. That means that both of the DPS would take these 2 towers, And I want you to pay attention to the minimap again real quick. And if there was a tower here and a tower here, and also maybe there's also a tower here, right? Of course, there is already a tower there. Then it would be better for the DPS with the prey marker to take this tower here, and then the tower, and then the other DPS should take this tower here, right? Because it's going to make the meteors opposite each other, which is going to mean the meteors can just do this, and it's going to be nice and easy to do, okay? So that's what I really need you to just focus on for now when it comes to doing that and deciding. Now I'm going to have more footage to go over. So because I have looked out here and I know that there's only this one tower and the DPS needs to take this tower, then I know that I'm going to look in the middle of the map now. And obviously I need to take one of these middle towers. I have no tower over here to take. I'm going to go to the middle instead. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the middle. I'm going to go in a clockwise direction. Okay, so you're going to see that. I'm going to go clockwise no matter what. And you'll see that my sage here also needed to go into the middle, and he also went in a clockwise direction as well. So we both went in the clockwise direction, and we both ended up in the towers that we are meant to. Now, sometimes there might be no tower. There might be a tower here, but there might have been maybe a tower here and a tower here. But our sage didn't have a tower here instead. Think that there was no tower here, and there was 3 people coming into the middle. Now, in this case, I would have took this tower. My Dark Knight would have took this tower, but my sage didn't have a tower here. Instead, he had a tower here. So he would be the adjust instead. He would have to take this tower over here. So he would do the adjust. Everyone else would take their tower confidently. Now that everyone has successfully took a tower, the Meteor people are going to have to run here. They're going to have to just run, keep running, do not stop, okay? No sprint, but just keep running is basically the idea here. So they're going to keep running around the map. You'll also notice that 8 more towers have spawned. Of course, in the footage, you can only see 3 towers here, but it's going to be 8. There's going to be a tower on each cardinal and each intercardinal. Now, because DPS got the prey marker, DPS are going to take all the cardinal towers. Meanwhile, tanks and healers are going to take every single intercardinal tower. So that's going to be our responsibility. Me and the sage here have so much room because we're in the middle to decide which intercardinal tower we're going to take. Meanwhile, the Dark Knight and the Scholar are already going to be an intercardinal here. So we need to pan our camera around the map here, ideally, and just see where our other tanks and healers are. Now, I've already decided that D is going to be the one here because I can see that my melee is here and my black mage is going to end here on a cardinal tower, and my melee is also on a cardinal tower, and there's no tanks or healers near D here. So I know that D needs to be taken. So I'm going to go into D. Now, you'll also notice that Faith Unmoving is being casted. Faith Unmoving is a knockback, and you need to use your anti-knockback if you are here. So if you're, the melee in this instance and the black mage here, you need to use your anti-knockback here. Otherwise, you will get knocked into the wall. The towers are going to go off. So as the outside people, ideally, make sure as soon as you see this cast, Faith Unmoving, press your anti-knockback. You can do it the moment you see the cast, and you'll be absolutely fine. As the middle people, you can also use your anti-knockback if you want, but you don't need to. In my case, I don't use my anti-knockback. I just let the knockback hit me into the tower here because it's just easier as someone in the middle. I can literally AFK in the direction that I'm going to get pushed back into, and you're going to see exactly in the footage that I'm literally just standing still, get knocked back into my tower, and just like that, I'm in my tower, no problem whatsoever. Now, I will go over a few more examples of meteors in just a moment, but let me quickly just go over the final bit of this phase. So Forden, he's always going to spawn north here with his sword, and he's going to cast his ultimate here. Now, you want to pop mitts. Again, no exceptions. You need to have an addle, a feint, and a reprisal here. There's no excuse not to have these 3 mitts up at the very least. Other than that, it's going to be healer mitts, maybe a dark missionary from your Dark Knight or a Heart of Light or whatever from your Gunbreaker, whatever. Any additional mitts is nice, but those 3 mitts are very important. The other mitts are going to be up to your group and how many mitts you want for this. Obviously, you're going to need shields as well, so a sucker or whatever from your shield healer and a sacred soil or a Keracha or whatever, just as many mitts as you can really get on without compromising next phase. As you can see, it does quite a bit of damage. That is with a Keracha, a sacred soil, a shield, and all the other mitts. So again, just figure out how many mitts you need for this. Over mitigate it at the beginning. When you first see this mechanic, over mitigate it and sort of figure out what mitts you can take away after the fact, because it's the first time you're going to be seeing this if it is. So just, make sure to over mitigate it. It's better to be safe than sorry. So he's going to do that, and he's actually going to then get a debuff. This is very important depending on if you want to capitalize on this debuff. This debuff here is going to make him take increased damage. This increased damage is pretty significant. So if you are struggling to meet the DPS check, try and hold your burst until after that ultimate goes out, and then you see this debuff here, and you want to capitalize on that and just do your burst then. So do your burst then when he does that, because he's going to take a lot more damage. He'll do these swings, ignore those swings, they don't do anything. And then he's going to cast Broad Swing, as you can see here. Broad Swing. Now, the easy thing to do with this, it's a very easy mechanic. Go behind Forden and just watch him. Pay real close attention. See that first swing? That first swing went like here. Go into that first swing. Go into that first swing. No exceptions. Go into it. And you'll see that he did 3 others. He did 1 there and he did 1 behind him. But if you go into the first one, you'll always be safe. So just go into the first one the moment you see it. And he's going to do that twice. He's going to do it again, Broad Swing. And again, just go into that first one, no problem. And then he's going to cast Etheric Burst. This is his Enrage. So if you do not kill him and this goes off, then you will die to the Enrage. And well, that's not a good time. So make sure to really burst him down if he's really high at this point. If you have some deaths as well, maybe pot in this part of the fight just to see the next phase. Because if you do have deaths or damage downs, it can get rough, but you can still recover through this. Sorry, Mr. Ozma, I know you didn't want these phases to be recoverable, but they very well much are recoverable if you do have deaths, so just keep that in mind. Maybe use some potions to try and get through the phase. Now that's Forden pretty much done. I'm going to just quickly cover this part because you're going to need this to live through the damage. And other than that, I'm going to cover the next phase in another video because it's dragging on enough as it is. So you're going to need mitts here. So we have a Sacred Soil, we have a Carachol, and we also have a Spread Low here. If anything is missing, I do come in and use to Shake It Off, but I usually save it for a next phase anyway. But yeah, I'm going to hold on to that Shake It Off, but if my Scholar does call it that they don't have their Spread Low, then I will use my Shake It Off. You'll see this transition, you'll see all these, yada yada yada, and boom, just like that. Transition does a lot of damage. You can see that a lot of people get pretty low, but at the same time they're pretty high, and that is that transition. So that's my first bit of advice for phase 3, because, you know, if you do see this phase, just make sure you're mitigating this part as well. Make sure you live through that damage, because nothing is worse than going through the transition and not living through the damage. Okay, the first example I want to show you is when tanks and healers are going to get prey markers here. You'll see that my Dark Knight got a prey marker and my Sage. My Sage is already south. I know that. So my Dark Knight is going to take my spot. I know that. I'm ready to move. So I pan my camera around as well, just in case I'm not looking at the party list. I see my Dark Knight here with the prey marker. He's going to take my spot. So I am fully aware that I need to rotate and just take his spot instead. Then I know that there's a lot of towers here, but there's only one tower here. I am the prey marker group this time. I am tanks and healers. So I'm going to take this tower, no exceptions. And I'm going to leave the rest for the rest of my group, of course. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out. I'm going to take my tower. And because it was tanks and healers prey marker, that means we are taking the cardinal towers this time. So what I'm going to do is I know my Dark Knight's coming here and he's going to end here. And I know that the Sage is going to end here and my Scholar is opposite me. So obviously, right, I'm going to take this tower here. So I'm just going to move into there already really early on. And then the moment I see the cast Faith Unmoving, you see that? I press my anti-knockback and then I'm just chilling in my tower. And just like that, that is that tower solution solved. I didn't get prey marker, but I still needed to move, and that's exactly how you'd solve it in this instance. Okay, and in this instance, I am going to get the prey marker, but because I moved directly north, I don't need to move any more. My Dark Knight, on the other hand, does get another prey marker, so he's going to have to move south because I'm already north. Now, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this tower directly in the middle because that's my only option. And he also had one directly in the middle, so I'm just going to place my Meteor marker literally in the middle of my tower. Now, if he had a different pattern, if he had maybe counterclockwise or clockwise, then what I can do is I can make it easier for him. If he had, for instance, clockwise, then I could go in front of my tower here, and this would give him plenty of room to place his meteors around here. If he had counterclockwise low, I would have a bit of a short pattern, so I would want to place my meteor here on the tower instead, and then move normally anyway, and it'll be absolutely fine. So just pay attention to your opposite side and how they're dealing with their movement as well, because it's going to make it easier for you to place your meteors. Because we both had opposite sides, we could simply just do this. And I like to zigzag through the ice and fire here, just because it makes it a little bit easier. Press your anti-knockback as soon as you see on Faith Unmoving, and then end on the opposite end. And then just like that, took my tower, no problem whatsoever. And that, my friends, will just about do the video. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate your time. If you enjoyed the video, then please do make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any feedback or any questions regarding this phase, then do let me know in the comments below. I would love to answer your questions or hear any feedback you have. If you like my content and aren't subscribed yet, then please do consider hitting that subscribe button, as that would really help me a bunch. If you would like to support me any further, there are a few social links in the description below. There is a Twitter, a Twitch, and a Discord, so if you do have time, checking those out would be highly appreciated. And with all that said and done, I will see you guys in the next one. But until then, friends, make sure to take it easy, stay safe, we out, goodbye.